everyone, welcome to Beekeeping While Black. I'm Karen with a Y. I'm so excited for you to join me in this video. Today I'm going to talk about what it was like to have my first expenses as a beekeeper. In my first year, I've gone through and looked at everything that I spent in 2021 towards beekeeping, or at least as close as I could get. There's some things that I didn't do a good job of tracking. For example, how much sugar I spent in this first year. I'm sure it was a ridiculous number, but that's something that I didn't track. But I was able to get pretty much like 98% of everything that I spent towards beekeeping. And so I want to share with you what those numbers are. I think this video would be valuable to people who are maybe curious and you're looking to go on the beekeeping journey. If you look at the numbers, I think you will find this to be helpful as you're thinking about planning your own budget for the future of beekeeping. And then it will also be beneficial to those who are maybe in their first year of beekeeping. And I just have some tips for things that are maybe a little bit more realistic than what a lot of the blogs or guides say that you'll spend in the first year, as well as some expenses that maybe you should consider investing in that they're not giving an account for. So, you know, for those who are beginning or just curious, I think this video is for you. But before we do, we're going to go into our intro video. Welcome back. So today, again, we're going to talk about what are the expenses. How much are the guides telling you are going to be the expenses for beekeeping? And then we're going to compare that to how much I actually spent. Those numbers are sometimes hugely different. And so I'm hoping that this can be a guide of something that is realistic for beekeeping. The first thing that I want to talk about is education and training. When I was looking at the different blogs, some of them didn't even take that into account, but that is an expense that I highly suggest people invest in. Do not get into beekeeping if you are not willing to make the investment in an actual class. These are living creatures and we need to be as ethical and as sustainable as possible when we're doing this work. There's a lot at stake when it comes to beekeeping, not only for the health of the bees and their vitality, but also your safety. And so I highly suggest that if you're going to be getting into this process, take a class that is certified in order to do that, or with someone who's been, you know, someone who you can be under their wing for a long time. But the blog that I read estimated that it would be around $20 for education and training. Let me tell you now, that's a whole lot. It cost $125 for me as a beekeeper to do a class with the DC Beekeeping Association, which is affiliated with the University of the District of Columbia, UDC for short. It was a great class. It was a class over a few months that we took on a weekly basis. It was, you know, a pretty long class at that when we were doing it, but it was very valuable to do that. There was a lot of content that frankly I probably forgot in the process, but I've had to come back and I have the tools and the resources and the notes to be able to come back to it. And so I highly suggest that if you are going to go on this process, take the investment. Bees are creatures. They need to be treated with the utmost respect as you're doing this process, and it's also important for your own safety to be able to be well educated as you go into this journey. And so I highly suggest that you take a class, but know that it will be worth more than $20, especially if you're working with local beekeepers. And frankly, I just think local beekeepers who are doing the education, they have been doing this typically for years. There is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money that has gone in order for them to actually learn this. And so they definitely deserve more than $20 for the service that they are providing. So the next category I want to talk about is protective gear. I couldn't find a number on this for some reason over multiple sources, but I'm not surprised because protective gear can be quite expensive, and it's also very dependent upon, you know, what sizes are you getting? What type of protective gear are you getting? Are you getting a jacket? Are you getting just a veil? Are you getting gloves? Are you not getting any of those things? Are you getting a jacket, pants? Are you going to get a one-piece type of suit that has the veil attached? Like, there's so many different factors that happen, but I have seen some suits that can be around probably in the $30 or $40 range, but honestly, you kind of get what you pay for when you get them that cheap. And then there's some suits that are in the hundreds. I guess they're kind of designer suits in some respects for those brands that are known to have, you know, certain quality of suits. And so I do think that you can go cheap on this. You don't want to go too cheap to the point that is the fabric does not have a quality. But I know for my beekeeping jacket, I probably spent less than $100 for just that jacket, and then with the pants together, they were probably still less than $100. But they gave me the protection that I needed whenever I wore it fully. And so you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on a suit, but you definitely want to go a little bit more expensive than the bare minimum, because you really do want a quality suit, because the point of it is to protect yourself. And if you don't have a good quality of fabric, it will be easy for bees, for their stings to penetrate potentially through the suit, and it could pierce your skin. And so for that, there was no range that was really there, but I spent $361.97 in protective gear. There's a few reasons for that though. One, I brought 2 suits last year. And so one of the suits was more of a protective. I had a jacket and pants that I brought that were separate pieces. And then the other thing that I brought was more of a vanity type of suit. I wanted something that would be a cute color and it would look good for photos that I was gonna get, or did get. That was a more designer style suit, and so it did cost more. So there was that. Also with protective gear, it's not just about the suit itself. Protective gear also accounts for like the hat that I brought that I've shown in past videos, where it was a silk lined hat. That was a pretty reasonable price, but I did that in order to make sure that my veil didn't touch my head with the white suit that I had. And then the other thing that I brought were gloves. I brought 3 pairs of gloves last year, mainly because the first pair that I brought, they were, less than $20. They were very cheap, but they were also too big in size for me. And so when I brought the gloves, I couldn't really have full dexterity because the gloves were just too big for me to actually use them and to be fully functional. And so therefore, I ended up having to get a new pair. And I invested a little bit more money. I spent in the $30 range, I think $36.99 for that pair of gloves. It was a better quality. It definitely has protected me from many bee stings. So they were a great pair of gloves. However, I had to buy a third pair because I tried to wash the gloves, but I didn't actually follow the instructions for washing. I did my own thing and I paid for it. So therefore, when I went back to the hive and tried to put them on, I could get my hands in them, but they were so tight and they just shrunk. And so it was one of those things where I felt like if I got stung, if a bee tried to sting me today, the stinger would go through the glove. And so I did as little as possible in that hive check just to make sure it was functional. And then I made sure that I got a new pair of gloves before I went back into that hive. And so that was an investment. I ended up buying the exact same pair of gloves because, again, they were good quality. It was just my bad practice of not actually following the washing instructions. So if you want to save money, I highly suggest that you also follow the instructions of the actual cleaning for any of your pieces. Those instructions are there for a reason, not just to be annoying, but it really can compromise the safety of the gear when we don't follow, or when I don't follow the instructions. But I did realize that had I not made those mistakes, or had I not had my vanity of wanting a cute looking, suit, I would have only spent $102.33. And so I would have spent less than half of what I actually did had I just kept it simple and just did with the suit, which was, again, a separate jacket and pants. And then had I just done the decent quality of gloves from the get-go, I would have spent barely $100. So just to give you a sense of what it could be. So if you want to know what I brought, I'm not sponsored or anything, but I'm happy to share what these links are. Just let me know in the comments, or you can send me a direct message or DM on social media and I'll share with you. The other thing that is also an expense that is very important for beekeeping is the hive itself. The bees need a place to go. They need a home. They need their little boxes and they need their frames to make, to have the comb and to be able to make the honey and to be able to lay eggs and all the other, important things that happen in the process. And so when you're doing that, that can be an expensive thing. It can be anywhere from $60 to $200. One source said, another one said $150 to $300 is the range. I spent nothing. I was fortunate enough that my mentor gifted me with supplies, and so I was able to use that. It ended up saving me a decent amount of money. It saved me hundreds, so I probably balanced out with some of the mistakes that I made in my initial investment. So therefore, you want to be careful though with using old supplies, especially with people that you don't know. I trusted my mentor when it comes to that, but you don't always want to use old supplies because some people, if their hive died because it was an infestation with like varroa mites or hive beetles or moths or something like that, that can still live in the hive boxes or whatever the case may be. So you want to be careful to use that stuff because you don't want a healthy hive, a healthy colony of bees to be exposed to old disease. I spent nothing. You definitely want to be careful with that. That's definitely a, kind of go at your own risk type of thing when it comes to beekeeping. You do not want to have a hive that is infected with something. And so you want to be careful and really trust who is giving their stuff away to make sure. And also maybe even ask questions about why their bees did not survive. Was it because they froze? Like that may not be as much of an issue, but if they died of like varroa mites, honestly, that type of stuff, when that happens, the hive boxes and all that stuff, that really should be burned, just so that make sure that there's no continuous infection of the boxes or any colonies that could be in it in the future. And so that's what I would suggest. But I did have free and I have a very healthy hive. So I trust that there was nothing wrong with the boxes that I got. But go at that with your own risk and know, the potential risk if you do use some old stuff. So the next thing to think about is also the bees themselves. Beekeeping, getting the bees themselves, that can be anywhere from free to probably around $350. I paid $280.73 for my hive. I have a really great hive. I would definitely go back to the people that I got it from. However, you do want to consider the price. There are ways that you can get freebies, which is to collect a swarm. That can either be physically collected or there's things that you can buy that can help to attract them to a hive to find a new home. I tried it. It didn't work for me. And I was closing in on a season where I probably needed to buy bees fast. And so once I didn't catch them after a few weeks, it was time to then actually just buy bees themselves. You can buy a nuke or you can buy a package of bees. A package of bees can be around $100 to $125 according to the guides. And then a nuke can be around $125 to $175. So keep that into consideration. But again, I paid a little less than $300, but it was a really good investment. I have a really great colony of bees, and I would definitely go back to that company to spend that extra premium because they are just so good in so many different ways. And so it was definitely worth the investment. The other thing to consider too with beekeeping that you have to keep up as an expense is hive hygiene. And so that pretty much means how are you managing any pests that can come into the hive. Varroa mites kill a lot of hives annually, so you have to, or you should, check for them when the season is known to get higher rates of them. And then if you have a high ratio of varroa mites, then you need to treat. So that can have an expense associated with it. And then also there's small hive beetles. They're super annoying. I had them in my hive. I did not have varroa mites to the extent that I needed to treat them, but I did have small hive beetles and I did have to treat it. And then there's also moths that you can get. And so all of them can be bad and actually lead to the death of a whole colony of bees. If you have a good hive, they can help with some of the cleaning of the hive, but there's still intervention that may need to happen sometimes. And so for me, the only thing that I had to worry about last year was small hive beetles. I ended up buying some Swiffer sheets, which is a method, but there's other ways to address them. And so the Swiffer sheets that I brought were like less than $10. So it really wasn't a lot for hygiene of a hive, but the guides can say it can be anywhere from $20 to $200 because I was fortunate in the hive that I got and not having a lot of pest or disease control that I had to worry about. I did not spend that much money on the low end or the high end. And so I was very fortunate in that rate and that amount, but that is something that you do need to consider. And there will be different seasons when you have to worry about those things. And so it can add up over time. The other thing that I also wanted to bring up was sugar. You buy a lot of sugar in that first year. We'll see how much I spend in the second year, but there's a lot of sugar that you have to buy, whether it be sugar water, especially when the hive is new, and also as the pollen and the nectar is starting to go away, as it starts to cool down, you start supplementing their diets with sugar water. One of the things that you end up doing in the winter too as a beekeeper is potentially giving them fondant. So my bees had enough honey to get through the winter, but just to be cautious, I also brought fondant, and that was to supplement them. I spent $26.45 on fondant. I brought it from an Etsy seller. It would be a lot cheaper if I had just made it myself. And so maybe that's something I'll do in this second year, but I highly suggest, if you want to save money, make your own fondant or see if you can find someone. But also Etsy is good. I got enough fondant to survive through the winter for them. They ate on it some, but they also had their honey, and they actually didn't eat all the honey. So nor did they go through all the fondant. So maybe I could have saved a little bit more money, but honestly, you can just do it yourself and you'll save money that way. And I'd rather overfeed them than to have them starve over the winter. So that was an expense that I don't think people really give too much account for. But during those seasons when you're having to feed them at a 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to water, you can end up going through a whole bag of sugar, like a normal size. You can end up going through that whole bag with just like one mason jar, which will last about a week. And so that is something to consider. You will go through a lot of sugar over this next year or through the years of just supplementing their diet. Things that I spent money on that was not on the list. There's other supplies that you need to get besides just hive tools. There's things like feeders for your hive. You need to have something to be able to give them water, but also to give them sugar water when that time of the season comes. I ended up buying one, and that was around $17.50. It was not that, so it was a good investment. It was very convenient. However, what I find is that the propolis was so strong one time that I ended up having to take it back with me home instead of being able to switch out the lids with other mason jars. I had to take it back home, boil it in water to get the jar open. And so after that, I decided to just buy extras so that I could save myself some trips between going back and forth. And so I did buy that, and I brought a 4-pack of that, and that was probably around like $10 or so. And then I also brought an entrance reducer for my hive, and that was very cheap, like maybe $5 or something on Amazon. So those were really cheap together. There's also other things like, as a beekeeper, it's important to keep notes. I don't do it as well as I should, but it is important. There's apps that you can use, but there's also journals that you can use. And so I actually have a journal that I purchased from another Black beekeeper, Nikita. I actually have an interview that I did with her where she talked about her endeavors as a beekeeper. And so I have that journal. And so that journal costs $25.23. The other thing that I brought that people don't talk about is winter or supplies for winter. Beekeeping is something where if you live in an area that has a winter where it can become freezing temperatures, it can be hard for a hive to keep itself alive and regulate their temperature. And so it's important in this process to be able to help them keep warm. And so you can get a bee cozy. That's the brand, or you could also just get like insulation and make it yourself. But I got the bee cozy because I struggled to find insulation when it was time to make it. And so because I had the Bee Cozy, I paid $49.45. If you are able, if it doesn't get any holes or things, it could potentially be reused. So it's definitely worth the investment to do that. It's worth the $50 instead of having a hive that could die, because January was very brutal, and so this definitely helped my bees to survive through that really cold period. And that $50 investment is far cheaper than the $280 that I spent for my actual hive, so it's worth the investment. The other thing that I also brought that was useful was a pen stylizer. When you're taking notes, your phone cannot handle the actual the gloves, and so the gloves are typically not touchscreen, and so therefore you may need to take off your gloves if you want to take a picture or a video to document what you're doing with your bees. And so I brought a pen stylizer that is connected to Bluetooth, and that has been very useful because then I no longer have to risk my hands getting stung by doing that. And so that's the journey that I'm on. Oh, one more thing. Membership. I'm associated with the DC Beekeepers Association. A lot of beekeepers are associated with their local or regional beekeeping associations. Some have memberships, some may not. It's only $15 that I pay for mine, and so it's definitely worth the investment. There's a lot of benefits to it, and so that may be another expense that you need to have, but it's definitely worth it. It can actually end up saving you money. And again, it's just good for knowledge and just resources that you can have. So yeah, that is the end of this video. Those are all the expenses that I had. I did not add it up, so I'll do it in editing, but I'll do a little video or some type of graphic to show what the total number was. But beekeeping can be expensive. There's definitely ways that I could have saved money that would have saved me, you know, probably a couple $100 had I made some different choices. But I just wanted to share what it was and to hopefully give you maybe not a sum total of what it costs to be a beekeeper, but just to get a sense of how much my expenses are and maybe some of those things that you can consider as you're looking on your own journey of beekeeping and how to save money or what to maybe budget for that you haven't seen people talk about. Please let me know what your thoughts are. If you are an experienced beekeeper, let me know what are your thoughts about the prices that I said. What has your experience been? Did things sound, you know, more in the range of what the writers say, or was your expenses more like what I spent? Are there things that you've learned that are good money saving tips? Are there things that you feel like, oh, you know, certain things are worth the purchase in the first year, maybe some things really aren't worth the purchase? But would love to hear your opinions, and also just let me know if there's any content that you all as new beekeepers or those who are curious would like to see. Also let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to kind of explore about maybe some topics or even to bring some new beekeepers into the conversation as we cover some different topics for beekeeping, especially for those who are new or are looking to join in the journey right now. And so thank you everyone. Please like and subscribe for the video. I'm very excited to be able to be on this journey with you all, and see you at the next video. Bye.